All right, welcome everybody. In this video, I want to go through another example where we are going to join together two tables in the tidyverse using the join functions. And there are different join functions: left join, right join, inner join, full join, that we defined earlier up top over here. And in the previous example, there would have been no difference had we run any of these functions to join the two data frames that we were working with, because they matched up perfectly in the columns that we were using to join them. In this example, we've got two tables below that don't match up perfectly. So I'm going to run these code cells. So here is a data frame that's actually a table that I created, which just has two columns, ID and X, and three rows of data. And here is table Y, which looks pretty similar. It has a first column ID, which is integers, 1, 2, and 4, and then it has a second column Y. And notice here, they have a column in common ID, but the rows are not all perfectly matching. So the first two rows have a match of IDs 1 and 2. X has a row that has an ID 3 that doesn't match. Tibble Y has a row that has an ID 4 that doesn't match. So let's see how these different join functions are going to interact with these tibbles when we try and join them using these different functions. So question 2a is asking us, what would the output generated be if we were to use a left join for tibble X and tibble Y? And so the left join is going to keep all of the rows in the left data frame. So in this case, that is X. So it's going to keep rows from tibble X, 1, 2, and 3. And then it's going to look at the other tibble and say, okay, it's going to try and add this column over here. So I'm going to have a row for ID, or excuse me, a column for ID, and it's just going to take all of the rows from X. So I'm just going to enter those first because it picks the table on the left, which is X. And then it's going to pull off column Y from the table that's on the right in this case. It's going to say, okay, there was a matching ID for 1, so I'm going to pull off the Y value there. There was a matching row that had an ID of 2. I'm going to pull off the corresponding value in the Y column from that row. There was no row that had an ID of 3 in this other data frame, so there's nothing for me to say for the Y value, so I'm going to give it an NA value there. So this is what I would expect to get out of this output. Let's run this code cell and double check that is indeed what we get, and that matches up. For the right join, it's now going to take all of the rows from the data frame on the right, which is Y. So it's going to keep all of the rows in data frame Y. So that is the first thing I'm going to enter, is all of the information from Y. And then it's going to go into the data frame X, in this case, tibble X, and look in, is there a row that has ID 1? And it's going to say, yes, there is. That corresponding value in the X column is X1. Is there a row that has ID 2? Yes, there is. The corresponding value in the X column is X2. Is there a row that has an ID of 4? Because this was present in the tibble Y, it's going to say, no, there is not. So I'm going to use an NA value there. So over here, it pulled off the value for X1. Over here, it pulled off the value for X2. Over here, it had no value for that row. So this is what I would expect to get for the output of right join, and that is indeed what I'm getting for the output of right join. If I do a left join, and in this case, if I look carefully, I switched the order that I entered the data frames into the function now. It's going to left join. It picks the rows from all of the rows from the table on the left, in this case, Y. So first it's going to enter all of the rows that it picks from column Y and all of the corresponding values from the Y column in those. And then it's going to go into Tibble X and try and match things up. So it did have a matching ID 1. It did have a matching row with ID 2. That X value was X2. There is no row in Tibble X that has an ID of 4, so it has an NA value over here. And let's check that out. Perfect. We are 3 for 3 with our output so far. In question 2D, we are doing an inner join on Tibble X and Tibble Y. And for an inner join, it's going to keep only the rows from both of the data frames that are present in both. So in this case, what that means is we've got these two data frames, and it's only going to keep the rows that have a matching ID value in both data frames. So ID 1, that exists in both of these data frames, so it's going to keep that row. ID 2 exists in both of these data frames. It's going to keep that row of information. 3 is in X, but not in Y, so it's going to drop that entirely. 4 is in Y, but not in X, so it's going to drop that row entirely. So the only rows that are kept are going to be the rows that are in both data frames, which are just 2 of them in this case. X are the ID 1 and ID 2 rows, and these are the corresponding values in the X and Y columns from those two data frames. And let's check our thinking on that one. Perfect. And then the last one is a full join, and the full join is going to keep all rows from both of the data frames. So it's going to keep all rows from X and Y. So there were 4 IDs in total. So it's going to keep all 4 of those, and then fill in the values accordingly. And if there were any values that it's unable to fill in, it'll just give it a missing value. So it had an X value for ID 1, 2, and 3, but not for 4. And it had a Y value for ID 1, 2, and 4, but not for 3. So the result should look like this, and we'll have 4 rows of data in the end, and that is exactly what we're getting there. So here's a little illustration of how these different join functions would work when we're trying to merge together 2 data frames using a column, in this case, an ID column, where we've got some rows that overlap, we've got some matching rows, and some rows that don't match from each of the data frames. So I hope that illustrates the distinction between these different join functions. Thanks, everybody.